At number 10, Joseph Kony. In case you blocked out the fever dream that was Kony 2012, let me give you a bit of a refresher on the evil and cruel man known as Joseph Kony. Kony is a super evil who formed a Christian fundamentalist group called the Lord's Resistance Army, or LRA. The group initially aimed to overthrow the government, but didn't stop there. Soon Kony became notorious throughout all of Africa as a destructive warlord and is documented having kidnapped 60,000 minors and forcing them into either becoming soldiers for his group or becoming slaves in other unspeakable ways. Kony claimed to be doing all of his crimes in the name of God and insisted he was not a terrorist but a freedom fighter. And of course that was definitely not the case. Since 2006, the LRA allegedly no longer operates in Uganda and is believed to be somewhere in the South Sudan, but no one knows for sure. And as for Kony, well, the monster is still out there hiding from authorities, but let's just hope that he is found soon.
So before we continue with the list, I just wanted to let all of you know that I host a channel called Most Amazing Top 10 Anime. So if you like, overly powered characters with big eyes and crazy hair yelling at each other and punching and hitting each other, then check us out. The Frankfurt Slasher. This next awful human being is believed to have been, taking the lives of 9 women in Philadelphia between 1985 to 1990. All that's currently known about him is that he's most likely, or was most likely, a middle-aged Caucasian, as a number of his victims were seen with someone matching that description before their deaths. What's odd about this case, though, is that the victims' ages range from like their late 20s to late 60s. That's quite the gap there in age. Typically, serial killers have a more specific, age range of their victims. The only thing really connecting these 9 is that they were all female. Now, if the killer was indeed a middle-aged man in 1990, there's a good chance that he may no longer be alive. But if he is, probably an elderly man now, making this case incredibly frustrating, as this is a guy who managed to commit this string of murders and live his entire life having never faced any consequences.
Coming in next, we have Josephine Sunshine Overacre. Active in the 1990s, Josephine started out as a mere environmental activist. But in 1996, along with genealogy professor William Roger, Josephine formed an offshoot of the already controversial collective called Earth Liberation Front, and she called hers the Family. The activist turned eco-terrorist group committed a string of bombings and arson between 1996 to 2001. And although no one was killed in the attacks, they managed to rack up $48 million in damages in the name of revenge for Mother Earth. And listen, can I just say that if you are fighting to treat the Earth better, maybe setting buildings on fire and blowing them up, which in turn creates a huge negative impact on the environment, might not be the best way to go. But either way, Overacre has managed to evade arrest and stay in hiding since her 2003 disappearance. She is the only member of the family that remains on the loose, and although it's not certain, authorities believe she is among an anti-government group in Spain, or at least somewhere in Europe.
So let's get away from killers for a moment and talk about Victor Figueroa. So there's a soccer player with the same name. I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about an escaped convict, the only known prisoner to have escaped New York State Prison and never get caught. In February of 1996, Victor was supposed to be on his way to the mess hall, but they found he was nowhere to be found. Prison guards searched everywhere, only to find a set of footprints leading to an abandoned mine shaft. The conditions of said mine shaft making it really dangerous to continue their search. Now, what's so strange about this, case is that Victor wasn't serving a very long sentence, only like 4 years at most. But he had a phone call with his sister a few days before he went missing, saying that one of the prison guards was giving him a really hard time. It's been speculated that he might have died falling into the abandoned mine shaft, but who knows? He could have survived and is still out there. There's also the possibility that said guard had something to do with his possible death, which I definitely hope isn't the case. Anyway, he's not as evil as other ones on this list, but this is still a very strange case.
Next up, the Freeway Phantom. The scariest thing about this convict is that no one actually knows who it is. An unidentified killer from Washington back in 1971, this monster abducted 6 young girls over the span of about a year. The Freeway Phantom was known to be a sicko and would tie up and strangle his victims before doing unspeakable things to their bodies, and then finally would dump them along the highway to be found. What was particularly odd about this killer was that he kept the victims' clothes on, or at least redressed them, except for their shoes. They never had their shoes on when they were found. That was until his second to last victim, when a fully dressed girl, shoes and all, was found with a note that read, "This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me, if you can." Signed, the Freeway Phantom. Over the years, they did have a few suspects, but they never managed to convict anyone for the gruesome acts, and this monster remains out there, hiding with a $150,000 price on their head.
Alright, next on the list is Glenn Stark Chambers. We got another escaped convict on the list, only this guy is lower on the list than Victor because he's much scarier. You know, he wasn't in prison for drug charges, he was in for murder, and he was serving a, full life sentence. But after years of relatively good behavior, he was allowed and given permission to work in the prison building furniture, which I wouldn't really call much of a, reward. Hey, you've been pretty good now, kid. Why don't you get in there and go build some coffee tables? To be fair though, Glenn wasn't, a very good dude, so that would probably be my gift for him as well. Anyway, understandably, Glenn wasn't about the furniture construction life, and, decided that his good behavior deserved even greater opportunities, like just not being in prison anymore. So he escaped. In order to escape from Florida's Polk Correctional Institute, Glenn had to think outside the box, or should I say, inside the box. He had several other inmates load him up, seal him in a crate, which was then shipped off to a warehouse outside of the prison. He was never seen again, with nothing but an open crate left when the truck was getting unloaded later. Ooh, spooky.
Coming in next, we have Bradford Bishop. Once a former Foreign Services officer for the United States, Bishop's whole life took a turn when he killed his entire family. The fateful day was March 1st, 1976, and after not receiving the promotion he had been anticipating, Bishop told his secretary he wasn't feeling well and left the office early that day. On his way home, police believe he stopped at the bank and withdrew several $100s before stopping by the hardware store to buy a pitchfork, shovel, and a can of gasoline, among a few other strange items. He returned home around 8 p.m. and from there released terror on his wife first, followed by his mother, and finally his 3 sons. He then allegedly drove their bodies to a wooded swamp roughly 300 miles away and set them ablaze before disappearing forever. Over the years, there have been many alleged sightings, but authorities have yet to be able to capture him. He continues to be high on the list of FBI fugitives, but no one knows for sure just where he's hiding.
Next on the list is the Long Island Killer. This elusive serial killer has several different monikers actually. The Manorville Butcher, the Craigslist Ripper, the Gilgo Beach Killer. Basically, he's dangerous and a pretty despicable person. That's what I'm deducing from reading those names. I say guy, but we really, aren't quite sure, though a large number of serial killers are men, so I just assume that's the case. The Long Island Killer has been active for a long time, around 20 years, and throughout that time, he's believed to be, responsible for the murder of up to 16 people, mostly using Craigslist to lure his victims before disposing them by the beaches of Long Island, where the bones of his victims began to be discovered. Most of his victims are sex workers, which sadly is often the case with serial killers. It's scary to think that this individual is still out there and could be anybody.
Alright, and next up is Alexis Flores. Currently one of the top 10 most wanted fugitives in America, Alexis Flores has been in hiding for his gruesome crimes ever since 2007. Now, back in 2000, a homeless man who people believed to be named Carlos at the time killed and then committed heinous acts with the body of a girl. Once the girl was found, Carlos had already fled the scene. Cut to 2002, and Alexis Flores was visited by the police for a mere noise complaint, but upon providing them with false ID, which is a felony in Arizona, was arrested and incarcerated for 60 days until he was ultimately deported back to his home country of Honduras. Then, in 2007, after DNA samples had been taken while behind bars, they found an unsuspecting match and only then realized that Carlos and Flores were in fact the same person, and that they had unwittingly let a killer run free. A warrant for his arrest was immediately sent out, but they have yet to be able to track him down, and it's believed he remains hiding out in Honduras to this day.
And coming in at the top of the list, we have the Stone Man. Between 1985 and 1989, a mysterious string of murders occurred in India, first in Bombay and then in Calcutta. These 26 murders were soon believed to be perpetrated by the same person. The first set of murders happened in Bombay. Homeless people were found having been bludgeoned to death in their sleep with stones. Police began to see a pattern after the sixth body was discovered. The assailant was never found. In fact, it's still not even clear whether these murders were committed by just one person, a group, or if copycat killers started operating. These murders were followed by the 13 murders in Calcutta that are officially known as the Stone Man murders. These ones took place over just a couple months and could have been committed by the same person in Bombay, but it's not officially known. The circumstances of the murders were exactly the same though, all homeless, all killed with stones. Several possible suspects were detained and brought in for questioning, but there was just not, enough evidence or even any witnesses to these attacks, so anyone detained was soon released, and the perpetrator or perpetrators have never been found. What makes this case extra sad is that the victims were members, of society who were, cast aside and forgotten about, and their murders were never, high profile, making it much easier for whoever committed the crimes to go under the radar.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have Derek L. Frierson. The information put out by authorities regarding this case states that the crime in question took place in 2015 on a night after the suspect had been drinking at a bar in the downtown Orlando area. After having a few too many, he apparently entered his vehicle to drive out of the downtown area. Already bad for sure. The report continues on that he struck the rear of a vehicle which was stopped for a red light at the intersection of East Colonial Drive and North Mills Avenue. When he impacted, it is said that his car was traveling at 55 miles per hour, which is 88.5 kilometers per hour, and that it made no attempts to avoid the crash. This crash caused the death of one person in the vehicle that was sitting at the red light, along with another one of the passengers to become paralyzed from the waist down, while the other 3 in the vehicle all sustained other injuries as well. Derek was found to have had a blood alcohol level of 0.215 that night, which is over 2.5 times the legal limit to drive, and not only this, but he also is said to have had prior DUI convictions in Florida as well as Missouri. Unfortunately, authorities have reported that since this crash, Derek has left the Orlando area and is currently trying to evade these charges. There is an active warrant out for his arrest pertaining to multiple charges, all as a result of this accident. In our number 9 spot today, we have Harry Dana Braswell Jr. Okay, so for this one, we have to take it back in time a bit to Harry's initial arrest, which was on February 22nd, 1975. Harry was arrested for taking the life of John Robbins. Basically, a couple days before his arrest, on February 19th, Harry and 3 accomplices entered John's home, tied him to the bed, and took his life. Everyone involved in the crime was arrested at the same time as Harry, and subsequently, they were sentenced to life in prison. This obviously doesn't sound like someone who is on the loose, so what could have happened? Well, after serving 8 years of his sentence, Harry escaped. In 1983, at the Sumter Correctional Institute, Harry hid himself inside one of the cabinets that he and another inmate were loading onto a truck inside of the facility. Once the truck left the facility, he and the other inmate jumped off of the truck and voila, they had escaped. While the other inmate was later recaptured in Oregon, Harry was never able to be located and he remains at large. In our number 8 spot today, we have Joseph Obregon. Joseph has been wanted by the Tampa Police Department for the last year at least, but the crime at hand took place back on December 5th, 2017. Joseph was initially arrested after he caused a crash after allegedly racing his Dodge Ram pickup truck against another. This is of course already a crime, but things turned so much worse when, as he allegedly raced, he also crashed into an uninvolved Toyota RAV4 that was carrying 2 occupants. Because of the crash, one passenger, Bill Swartz, who is 78 years old, passed away at the scene. His wife Jane, who is 58 years old and was with him, ended up passing away at the hospital on January 20th, 2018. As a result of all of the charges brought against him, Joseph was set to appear in court on September 17th, 2021 after a plea deal was reached. Despite this seemingly initial early cooperation, Joseph failed to appear in court, after which a no-bond warrant for his arrest was issued. In our number 7 spot today, we have Alfredo Acevedo. On June 9th, 2001, Alfredo was traveling southbound on State Road 93, which is on Interstate 75 in Charlotte County, and he was driving a 1984 white Chevrolet van. According to the statement the authorities put out while traveling in this vehicle, Alfredo had a blood alcohol content that was almost twice the legal limit. This of course led to him losing control of the vehicle, which ended up overturned. At the time of this crash, Alfredo wasn't alone in the vehicle and instead had a few passengers with him. As a result of the crash, 2 passengers in the vehicle died and 2 others sustained incapacitating injuries. Despite the clear severity of the crash as well as the horrifying injuries sustained, Alfredo is still wanted by the Florida Highway Patrol to answer for his involvement in this crash. In our number 6 spot today, we have Gaspar de Gaspar. On February 3rd, 2015, Gaspar was traveling in a 1996 yellow Thomas passenger bus when he pulled into the Marathon gas station in Indiantown. This small community was shocked that day for what transpired next. As Gaspar was backing the bus into the parking lot, there were 2 men sitting on a bench in front of the station. For reasons that no one is exactly sure of yet, the bus didn't stop and instead ended up striking both men, leaving one pinned between the station and the bus. Unfortunately, this led to the man passing away at the scene. Gaspar is said to have exited the bus after this horrific moment, but instead of sticking around, he apparently fled the scene. Others have identified him as being from the town, but no one is entirely sure where he went. There is an active arrest warrant out for him for a hit and run. In our number 5 spot today, we have Uriel Aguilar. The incident involving this man is said to have taken place on June 26th, 2008, when Uriel ran into another man named Pedro Trevino at the Prime supermarket in Mulberry, Florida. The men knew each other because they were co-workers, and there was a bit of a rocky history there because it is said that they had prior altercations with one another. Authorities reported that as Uriel and his brother were leaving the store, Pedro approached them and challenged Uriel to a fight. Uriel agreed to the fight, and when he went to meet Pedro in the parking lot for it, he also brought a weapon along with him. The two began fighting, and this is when Uriel used this weapon against Pedro, which ended up taking his life. After the fight, authorities claimed that Uriel fled the scene and was last seen in the area of Sparkman Road in Plant City before disappearing. Uriel still has an active warrant for this crime. In our number 4 spot today, we have Augustin Lara Nunez. Augustin is another one of those people who caused an accident and decided to flee the scene, fleeing the consequences of their own actions. On October 22nd, 2006, he was driving a 2006 silver Ford truck westbound on State Road 82. As he traveled, he encountered the scene of a prior crash that unfortunately involved a fatality. As a result of this previous crash and the investigation that needed to take place, there was a Lee County deputy who had positioned her marked patrol car facing south in the westbound lane with emergency lights activated, and a detour to avoid this accident had been set up. Like I mentioned, Augustin ended up allegedly coming across it, so it's clear that he wasn't paying attention or just flat out ignored the detour. This ended in the front of his vehicle striking the deputy's vehicle, which sadly ended in fatality for the officer. As a result of this crash, Augustin was charged with DUI involving death, and of course a felony arrest warrant was put out, but despite this, he has yet to be located and brought to justice. It is currently believed that he likely fled the country, but authorities are still on the lookout should he ever try and return to the United States. In our number 3 spot today, we have Jose Arturo Palomino. On February 28th, 2009, Jose was driving south of Sample Road in Pompano Beach on I-95 southbound in a 1996 silver Mitsubishi Eclipse. During this time driving, Jose ended up striking and killing a 23-year-old woman who was standing next to her vehicle on the shoulder of the roadway. This is of course tragic, and unfortunately accidents accidents do happen, but it's what happened next that turns this into an even bigger thing. Jose is said to have chosen to leave the scene of the crime. He fled the scene of the accident and later abandoned the car that he was in a field. Turns out that the car he was driving wasn't even his, as he took to calling the owner, explaining that it had been in an accident and that he was sorry for taking it without permission. Despite the time it's been, however, authorities have been unable to locate Jose in order to arrest him on the warrant of leaving the scene of a crash involving a death. Authorities believe it is highly possible that he has since left the country. In our number 2 spot today, we have Victor Hernandez. Victor has been on the run since 2018 as he is wanted for taking someone's life. On March 11th, 2018, it is said that Victor killed another man by the name of Luis L. Herrera Kindlin. This crime took place in Miami, and since the incident, Victor hasn't been found. In the poster about how Victor is wanted, authorities revealed that not only should he be treated as being armed and dangerous, but he also has one identifying feature about him, and that is the fact that he has a stoma in his throat. Right now, there is a reward for any tips that lead to his arrest. Right now, the Miami-Dade Florida Keys Crime Stoppers is offering a reward of up to $3,000, so if anyone has any information, they should definitely reach out to them to share, and all the tips will remain anonymous. In our number 1 spot today, we have Eric John Ritters. Eric is a wanted man and has been for quite a while now, since an incident that occurred on November 8th, 2002. Basically, that night Eric was traveling in a 1999 Oldsmobile northbound on Florida State Road 423, and he was going quite fast, definitely a lot faster than he should have been. As he sped, he allegedly lost control of the vehicle and ended up striking another car that was legally stopped. The front of Eric's car ended up hitting the driver's side door of the other vehicle, which caused significant damage as well as very sadly led to fatal injuries for the driver, as well as the 2 other occupants of the vehicle that Eric hit. Eric was not only driving while intoxicated, but he was also going approximately 97 miles an hour at the time of the incident, despite it being a 45-mile-per-hour zone. I had to convert it to kilometers to get the full magnitude of the speed, so if you're like me, that's about 156 kilometers per hour in a 72 kilometer per hour zone. Despite these extensive injuries and the loss of life, Eric completely disappeared and still has 3 active warrants out for his arrest.
Coming in at number 10, the Eastbound Strangler. Back in 2006, one fateful night, this monster took the life of 4 women and was never seen from again. The Eastbound Strangler targeted 4 New Jersey escorts and left them behind the Golden Key Motel, face down, in a row, facing east and about 60 feet apart from each other. The victims were left fully clothed, minus having their socks and shoes removed, and all appeared to have been killed in the same way. Early on, there was speculation that it could have been linked to the Long Island killer, another unknown attacker, but it was later ruled out by investigators. Despite 15 years of investigation, they have never been able to come close to any leads, and whoever was responsible has never been caught, and the $25,000 reward remains unclaimed. Next up at number 9, the Texas Killing Field. Now, what would seem like a normal 25-acre patch of land just off the highway near Houston, Texas, is actually a haunting field where more than 30 bodies have been found since the early 1970s. Nearly all of the victims found have been young women and girls, and there are apparently many more missing women from the area, but no remains beyond the 30 victims have ever been recovered. Despite the authorities' best effort, it is unknown how many perpetrators have actually contributed to this field, though it's suspected that more than one person is responsible. To date, only 3 of the cases have been successful in convicting an attacker, and the remaining 27 remain unsolved, with no leads and no luck of where to turn next. In 2011, a film entitled Texas Killing Fields was made about the series of crimes associated with the notorious plot of land, but it was not received well, and unfortunately did not kickstart anything more than upset families of the victims and a few false confessions to the atrocities. Coming in at number 8, the Flat Tire Murderer. Active between 1975 to 1976, this monster is believed to have been responsible for between 12 to 35 deaths, though the exact number is still unknown. The perpetrator got his name as allegedly he would offer to help women traveling alone who had gotten a flat tire, but unbeknownst to them, it was the attacker who had deflated their tires in the first place. While not all victims followed this exact formula, it was certainly the method for the first of his 2 victims. Bodies bodies of the victims were found dumped into canals, while their cars were found abandoned miles away. Authorities believe the cause of their deaths to have been from drowning, and were all found with signs of being taken advantage of prior to their death. Over the years, with no culprits being found for these vicious attacks, some have suggested it could have been the work of Notorious Ted Bundy, but that's merely speculation and has no evidence to back it up. For all we know, the flat tire murderer remains on the loose. Coming in at number 7, the Honolulu Strangler. Credited with being responsible for the death of 5 women, this unidentified killer was active only between 1985 to 1986 and was never caught. The sadistic perpetrator was known to target women, but that seems to be where the links stop. All of his victims were brutally attacked and taken advantage of, and then left tied up on the street to be found by police. Authorities took this case very seriously, as at the time it was the first known repeat criminal of his kind in Honolulu. Local authorities put together a 27-person task force, but even with all that manpower, they were never able to find the attacker. There was hope when a man named Howard Gay was arrested, as he seemed to fit the profile, but he was eventually released after further interrogation. Years later, in 2017, the case was covered by a true crime podcast, and once again in 2022, but despite its popularity, we have no idea what happened to the Honolulu Strangler. Next up at number 6, the West Mesa Bone Collector. Back in 2009, a woman on a leisurely walk with her dog came across something peculiar, a human bone. Little did she know, she'd actually stumbled upon a major crime scene. Upon her discovery, authorities became immediately involved and discovered that it was a mass grave filled with human remains. Nicknamed the West Mesa Bone Collector, this killer was active between 2001 and 2005 and was a truly sick man. He was known to target young women, usually Hispanic, and almost always involved in late night services or with connections to the drug trade, but not exclusively, making it hard to identify just why he chose the victims he did. The thing is, during 2001 to 2005, there were reportedly more missing persons than usual, but I guess the New Mexico police didn't feel much need to dive into the disappearance of women involved in this type of work. While we know practically nothing about the killer, we do know that he is responsible for the deaths and that he would take the bodies to the desert to dispose of them. After years of police investigation, the remains of 11 women were found scattered in the deserts of Albuquerque, but the exact way they died is yet to be discovered, as medical examiners and forensic experts have not been able to identify his methods, which is very unusual. Police and FBI have never been able to track down who is responsible for ending these young women's lives, and the monster remains on the loose. Coming in at number 5, the Frankfurt Slasher. Between 1985 and 1990, this monster preyed upon women in a rough neighborhood in Philadelphia. The Frankfurt Slasher was known for being incredibly violent, mutilating the victims' bodies past recognition. What was designed to be on the inside of the body, like organs and muscle tissue, would often end up exposed, and then after having his way with the victims, he would leave them on the street, strategically posed for when the police would find them. Believed to be responsible for the death of 9 women, the Frankfurt Slasher targeted specifically white women, usually ladies of the night, with a public history of mental illness. But oddly, the ages of the victims ranged from 28 all the way to 68. One man, Leonard Christopher, was convicted of one of the crimes in 1990, but more happened once he was put away, causing concern that maybe they'd found the wrong man. Further, significant questions have popped up regarding the quality of evidence they used to convict Christopher. He apparently did not match witness reports of the white man seen with other victims, leaving many in fear that the Frankfurt Slasher remains uncaught and unidentified. Next up at number 4, the Chicago Strangler. Between 2001 to 2018, a reported 75 Chicago women all lost their lives the same way, suffocation. But it wasn't until 2019 that a task force was made to try and stop these killings from happening. Originally, authorities denied that there was any link of the crimes and denied it all being one person committing them, hence the delay in gathering a task force. But after an article from the Chicago Tribune ran in 2018, scene, they were forced to admit that it was in fact a distinct possibility. As was uncovered in the 2018 article, there was in fact a few distinct links between the crimes. All the victims were women, all the victims were killed the same way, and nearly all the victims were black. Coincidence or not, the optics were very bad, as it seemed the authorities were not taking the death of black women seriously, and the task force was created. Then in 2021, a docu-series on Discovery Plus began streaming, and though activists were demanding answers from the Chicago Police Department, they still maintained they could neither confirm nor deny if the killings were from a repeat convict. We still have no clue who killed these women, and they still remain out in the world walking free. Next up at number 3, the I-70 killer. You wouldn't think the shopping mall off the highway would be a dangerous place to be or get a job, but in the spring of 1992, it very well could have been. 30 years ago, along the Interstate 70, or I-70, an unidentified man was responsible for the death of 6 store clerks who all had the same thing in common. They all worked in a shop off the same highway, they were all brunettes with long hair, and they were mostly all women. Except for one man, but he too had long hair and wore a ponytail, and police suspected the killer mistook him for a woman from behind. The attacker oddly didn't seem too interested in anything but taking their lives, as he rarely robbed the stores after, and if he did, he would maybe take $100. After one of the attacks, a customer actually walked in the store and caught him, the 2 victims on the floor, and the attacker still with the weapon in his hand. But fearing for his life, he ran away as fast as he could, and in shock, didn't call the authorities until nearly an hour later, well after the man had escaped the scene. A few years later, in 1994 Texas, 2 similar attacks took place, and then again in 2001 Indiana. The cases have been featured on America's Most Wanted, Unsolved Mysteries, and Dark Minds, but the man has never been caught and remains walking among us to this day. Coming in at number 2, Hercules. While some say killer, others say vigilante. This perpetrator separates themselves from the rest. The distinction between Hercules and, say, the Frankfurt slasher? Well, Hercules only attacks those who have already committed a brutal crime. Or rather, one very specific brutal crime, taking advantage of women. In 2019, 3 men were found in Bangladesh, each shot and each with a note tied around their neck. While not identical, all the notes followed the same structure. First stating the name of the victim whose neck the note was wrapped around, followed by the name of the victim who they had attacked. It would then explain that this was the fate of those who committed this crime and that others should beware. Signed, Hercules. Law enforcement has yet to uncover who is responsible for these deaths, but have no clue if the killings are by one person or a group of people. It sure has sparked debate, with many questioning who the real bad guy is here. And last up today at number 1, Pedro Lopez. Nicknamed the Monster of Andes, Pedro Lopez might be one of the most notorious criminals alive. After being kicked out of his childhood home at just 8 years old for taking advantage of his younger sister, Lopez was evicted and sent to live the rest of his childhood on the streets of Colombia. According to Lopez, not long after he was thrown out, he was abducted and assaulted, and then by 13 was taken in by a family, but after 2 years ran away. By 1978, Lopez claims to have been responsible for the death of 100. That same year, an indigenous tribe caught him and was going to execute him, but a nearby missionary took pity on him and demanded they release him and call him into the authorities. The police, however, for whatever reason, promptly released him from custody. From there, he fled to Colombia once again, followed by Ecuador, where he reports to have attacked about 3 girls a week, and when he was caught and arrested in 1980, he confessed to killing 200 victims, but there's suspicion that it could have been worse, as many as 360. Though he did remain jailed for 14 years, in 1994 he was released from prison for good behavior and sent back to Colombia to serve the rest of his sentence in a psychiatric facility. But only 4 years later, in 1998, he was ruled legally sane and released on a $50 bail. Rather predictably, he fled the country country after his release, and a warrant for his arrest was promptly released. His whereabouts remain a mystery, and no one knows if he has committed any more attacks since he vanished.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot we have Margaret Lorraine Smith. Starting off this list with one of the craziest stories on it, Margaret is quite a dangerous woman. She actually is charged with hiring a man to kill her own husband, George Smith. On August 6, 2007, it is said that she hired a man and lured her husband to Surfside Beach late at night. She left George sitting in the sand as the man she hired carried out her evil, horrible plan. Both Margaret and the man she hired were both indicted on these charges in September of 2007. While the hired man was convicted, Margaret herself has been running from her own actions since August 11, 2009. She fled while on bond awaiting the start of her trial. We could ask ourselves all day why she was allowed to be released on bond for such a horrific crime, but at the end of the day, it won't help anyone find her. She was last seen on video at a Walmart in San Antonio getting into a maroon four-door sedan. There are many rewards being offered for anyone who can provide tips that lead to her arrest, and authorities have also released age-progressed photos to show what she may look like now. Hopefully at some point she is caught and brought to justice for the horrible thing that she did. In our number 9 spot today we have Israel Aguirre. Israel was first arrested in 2002 on the charges of theft as well as being charged for taking someone's life. He was convicted of his theft charge in 2003 and served times at a corrections facility for it. After his sentence was finished, he was deported from the United States before standing trial for the charge related to the killing. In 2005, however, he was arrested once again in Dallas, this time for a different crime as well as for failure to identify himself. He pled no contest and was released on bond. He made a few different court appearances between 2005 and 2007, but eventually he disappeared. On September 9, 2007, the Kaufman County Sheriff's Office issued a warrant for his arrest for the killing, but he is yet to be seen. In our number 8 spot today we have Troy James Allison. Born in Houston, Texas in 1953, Troy has quite a criminal history, including convictions in 1973 and 1976 for some very serious crimes. In 1977, he was convicted of a horrifying crime following an incident involving a 22-year-old female. For this, he received a 75-year sentence, which he served up until he was paroled in 2003. Since 2004, however, he has been on the run. He was last seen in the Lufkin area, but is still wanted for his parole violation as well as failing to comply with orders to register as a sex offender. The Most Wanted website lists his past employment history, as he's had jobs as a pipe fitter, welder, and a meat cutter. In our number 7 spot today we have the Phantom Killer. This is the moniker used to refer to an unidentified serial killer who was active in the spring of 1946. During this time in Texarkana, Texas, whoever this suspect is killed 5 people and injured 3 others over the course of 10 weeks. Many people call this series of crimes the Texarkana Moonlight Killings, and despite best efforts, no one has been able to solve the crimes. Basically, the MO of these incidents involved young couples who had parked their cars on the secluded Lover's Lane at night, and they were the primary targets. The first couple who encountered this monster thankfully survived their attack, and they were able to provide a description which involved the assailant wearing a white sack over his head with holes cut out for the eyes. From all of the urban legends, true crime stories, and just general spooky stories that I've heard, which involves people parking on Lover's Lane, I think it's officially convinced me to never go anywhere near any such kind of place. Because of the time it's been, it's possible that whoever is responsible for these crimes will never be caught. In our number 6 spot today we have Susan O'Connor. About a month and a half ago, a woman was arrested and it was found out that she had been on the run for years. 54-year-old Susan O'Connor was pulled over on October 28th for speeding, but what the officers found was more than they likely could have ever imagined. As it turned out, Susan was on the run since 2009 when she fled with her then 3-year-old son. Her fingerprints confirmed her true identity and she was charged. For 14 years, Susan's son was listed as a missing person, but with Susan being found, the now 17-year-old was finally reunited with his father. It appears as though the reason Susan fled in the first place was to disrupt and interfere with some sort of custody custody issue that she was having at the time. Susan is now being held at the Collin County Detention Facility in McKinney on warrants for failure to appear and interference with child custody. Her bond has been set at $100,000, and if convicted, she likely will face time in prison. In our number 5 spot today, we have Jose Fernando Bustos Diaz. Back in 2005, Jose was working on a ranch as a hand at the Oaks of Kendallwood stables, which were located in northwest Harris County. As he worked here, he made the terrible decision to take someone's life. He pleaded guilty to the crime once caught and received a 35-year sentence for it. On April 6, 2010, however, this story spun even more out of control when he escaped from his prison unit approximately 70 miles southwest of San Antonio. On that day, the sheriff's office and the jail both issued warrants for his arrest regarding the escape, and on April 13th, the U.S. Marshals Service issued another one pertaining to unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. Many people believe that he may have managed to flee the country entirely, but at this point, anyone's guess could possibly be correct. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Servant Girl Annihilator. This horrible name refers to one of America's first known serial killers who was responsible for taking the lives of 7 women and 1 man in Austin, Texas between December of 1884 and December of 1885. All of the victims in this case were members of staff who had either been killed as they slept or dragged out of their beds and killed outside of their homes. There was even one night on December 24th, 1885 where this person took 3 lives in one night. That is horrifying. There have been many people questioned, arrested, and even one likely suspect, but considering the many years it's been, it's safe to say that the one responsible will likely never be found. In our number 3 spot today, we have Brandon Hogan. Brandon has landed himself a spot on the Texas 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list, the most amazing top 10 most wanted fugitives list. He is said to have ties to Coryell County, which includes both the cities of McGregor as well as Gatesville, Texas. The reason he is on the most wanted list is because in 2007 he was convicted of harming someone and it caused bodily injury, and because of this he received 5 years probation. His probation, however, didn't last long. It was actually revoked the following year and he was instead sentenced to 5 years confinement. In August of this year, however, Brandon was arrested for theft of firearm, burglary of a habitation, assault, and criminal mischief. On September 26, 2002, he escaped from his work crew station and since then has been on the run. In our number 2 spot today, we have Matthew Edgar. Born in 1996, although young, Matthew has quite the history when it comes to run-ins with the law. In 2015, Matthew was convicted of evading arrest as well as causing serious bodily injury, and as a result of this, he was sentenced to 3 years of confinement and 3 years of probation. In 2020, things took a way darker turn, however, when he was arrested for taking someone's life. In 2021, he was subsequently arrested for harming a family/household member, which appears to have been by way of impeding their ability to breathe. Earlier this year in January, he was attending his initial days of the trial that was in relation to him taking someone's life before he fled on January 26, 2022. He did end up being convicted in absentia and has been sentenced to 99 years confinement. On January 27, 2022, just a day after he fled, a warrant was issued for his arrest, and hopefully he soon is found so that he can serve the sentence he received from the judge. In our number 1 spot today, we have Patrick Carrier. 3 of the Texas 10 most wanted fugitives quite recently were finally found and brought back into custody, and Patrick is just one of them. After fleeing, Patrick was finally caught and was arrested in Houston on November 21st. He initially was in trouble in 1993 when he was convicted of a killing and received a 45-year sentence for that crime. In 2013, he was convicted again for possession of an illicit substance and was sentenced to 6 months confinement, but was released on parole in October of 2020. This turned out to be a mistake, however, as he totally disappeared, completely violating the terms of his parole, and with a violent history, that is a major cause for concern. At the beginning of 2021, in January, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles issued a warrant for his arrest for a parole violation, and then in March, just a few months later, the Harris County Sheriff's Office issued a warrant for his arrest for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Thankfully, this is one person on this list who was found so that they can finish serving the sentence that they were given.
Coming in at number 10 is the Colonial Parkway Killer. An active criminal between 1986 to 1989, this person specifically targeted couples traveling Virginia's scenic parkway late at night. During that time, 3 couples were found dead and 1 couple went missing but is presumed to have the same fate. A different couple was found each year, leading authorities to question, was this person only killing once a year, or were this just the ones they found? The cases had received major media coverage, including documentaries, news articles, and TV shows as recent as 2021, but despite having over 130 suspects, the FBI have yet to be able to put a name to the face of the crimes. One bizarre piece of this puzzle is that in 2010, a note was discovered in a box taken years earlier from one of the victims' apartments. The note stated that she was to meet someone in a blue van at a rest stop, and when the Virginia State Police was asked about this, they claimed that the note had been previously examined. But in 1989, during the time of the murders, an investigator involved told case reporters that he was unaware of the existence of the note. So, if you ever find yourself driving the scenic route of Virginia, do yourself a favor and don't make a pit stop. Next up at number 9 is Glenn Stewart Godwin. In 1996, this killer was added to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's top 10 most wanted list after he escaped from a California prison back in 1987. At the time of his escape, he was serving a 26 to life sentence for the death of Kim LaValle. Trying to hide the body, took her up a mountain and decided to use a homemade explosive in an attempt to make the remains disappear. However, residents of the mountain only a few months later came across some remains, thus sparking his arrest. When he escaped prison in 1987, he fled to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico and joined up with a cartel, but was found and convicted in 1991 and sent to jail in Guadalajara. It was here that he took the life of a fellow inmate and then escaped a second time only 5 months later. Authorities have yet to track him down after 31 years, but it is believed that he is still on the loose today. So, keep your eyes peeled if you're ever in Latin America, because the FBI is offering a $20,000 reward for anyone with information that could lead to his arrest. Next up at number 8 is Bible John. Active between 1968 and 1969 in Glasgow, Scotland, the man nicknamed Bible John is believed to be responsible for the death of 3 young women. All 3 of his victims were young brunettes who he would lure in at a local dance hall in the city. The unidentified criminal is referred to as Bible John as, according to a key witness, saw a man who picked up women yet quoted extensively from the Old Testament and frowned on adultery. But of course, taking the lives of young women seemed alright in his books. For decades, the Glasgow police have tirelessly searched for the monster, but have remained unsuccessful in tracking him down. To date, the search for Bible John has been the most extensive manhunt in Scotland criminal history. It was also the first time in Scotland's history that a composite drawing of the perpetrator was allowed and publicized in an attempt to get more information from the public. Although there have been a few suspects over the years, none have been convicted, and to this day it is unknown who is responsible for these horrible attacks. Next up at number 7 is the Monster of Florence. Active between 1968 and 1985 in Florence, Italy, this man is responsible for the death of 8 young couples who he would target while they snuck away into the woods trying to be intimate outside of their homes. Now, in 1970s Italy, this could be a common occurrence, as it was customary for young couples to not live with each other until marriage, and with nowhere else to go, sometimes the great outdoors was their only alternative. The part about this that really gets under your skin is that the female victims would be found mutilated, with their intimate areas removed with, quote, a surgical precision that led police to believe he had a medical background. More than 100,000 men were investigated for these crimes, with some being arrested or even tried, but eventually another killing would occur, exonerating them and forcing police to continue their search. The search continued for this gruesome monster, and a local farmer named Pietro Pacini was convicted in 1994 for 6 of the killings, but later in 1996 it was overturned. Pacini then died a few years later, but it is strongly believed he did not work alone, and while 5 accused men have been sent to jail at one point or another, they were all eventually released, leaving this case wide open with the alleged convict running free. Coming in at number 6, we have the upstairs lounge fire. In June of 1973, a New Orleans gay bar was the victim of the second worst attack on the American queer community, only surpassed in 2016 by the Pulse nightclub massacre. The upstairs lounge was a beloved hub with drag queens and music, but sadly on this 1973 Pride weekend, everything would change. The bar was located on the second floor of the building, and out of nowhere patrons started to smell gasoline, but initially thought nothing of it. A few minutes later, a doorbell rang, and when someone opened to see who was there, a fireball was thrown into the room and immediately erupted the room into an inferno. It is now known the perpetrator used a Molotov cocktail. The fire burned fast, lasting only 20 minutes, but in that time, 32 lost their lives and another 15 were severely injured by the attack. The survivors of the fire were taken to identify the bodies of those who died in the tragedy, but according to one survivor, many of the identified bodies remained unclaimed by family members as they were ashamed and wanted nothing to do with their gay kin. After the attacks, many survivors refused to show their faces, afraid of the homophobia that would follow due to the media coverage. No arrests were ever made, and it's very likely that whoever committed this atrocity continues to walk the streets of New Orleans to this day. Next up at number 5, the Stone Man. Active between the years of 1985 to 1988 in Mumbai, India, this mysterious criminal was never caught. Believed to be responsible for the death of 26 people, the Stone Man got their name due to their cruel methods. The Stone Man would target homeless people sleeping alone on the streets at night and used concrete blocks or stones, sometimes weighing up to 65 pounds to carry out their gruesome plan. According to the media, 12 people died at the hands of the Stone Man in Mumbai, India between 1985 to 1988, and then they moved to Calcutta where another 12 people were found dead in a single year. Now, it's not known for sure if the Calcutta killer was the same as whoever committed the atrocities in Mumbai. Authorities did mention it could have been a copycat, but most seem to believe it was all one person, or at least a group of people working together. No one has been charged for any of the crimes, and all remain unsolved. Coming in at number 4, the Doodler. This next criminal was from San Francisco and active for just 1 year between 1974 to 1975. However, in that year, the unidentified killer is believed to have taken 16 lives. He was known to target specifically white men in gay clubs and got his name as he was known to sit around doodling pictures of them to draw them in. Once they got to talking, he would lure them elsewhere, like a lake or a park, and follow through with the rest of his evil plan. Unfortunately, due to the rampant homophobia of the time, when police did find a suspect for the case, they couldn't proceed with criminal charges, as none of the 3 surviving victims of the brutal attacks felt safe to out themselves publicly by testifying in court, fearful of how the consequences might impact their daily lives. The case remains open with no known suspect of who committed the crimes, and in 2019 the police offered a $100,000 reward to anyone with more information of the killer. Next up at number 3, the Craigslist Ripper. Also known as the Long Island Killer, this man is thought to be responsible for the death of 17 people between the years of 1996 to 2010, and got his name as he was known to target women of the night who advertised their services on Craigslist. Although his crimes began in 1996, none of his victims were found until 2010, many wrapped up in sacks or garbage bags along the Long Island shore. It's speculated that he may have been, or that he currently is, a police officer, as whoever committed these crimes seemed to have an in-depth knowledge of the investigation techniques not typically known by just anyone. Sadly, of the 17 found, only 5 have been able to be properly identified due to the nature of how he left the bodies. Coming in at number 2, the Zodiac Killer. Possibly the most famous repeat convict known to date, this criminal is as scary as it gets. Active in California during the late 60s and early 70s, the Zodiac Killer seemed to get off on the chase, sending in letters and highly encrypted clues to the police that supposedly would reveal his identity and more, if only the puzzles could be deciphered. Not only would he send in cards to the police, but he was known to mail in his taunting clues to local newspapers, threatening awful consequences if they were not printed. There are 7 known victims that he is known to be responsible for, 2 surviving his brutal attacks, although he claims to have killed 37. The especially creepy part about this particular monster is that, as detailed in his letters, he believed that all those whose life he ended would become his slaves in the afterlife, and that he would be sent to paradise. Although the Zodiac ceased all written communication by 1974, the case remained open since 1969, with no known perpetrator. And last up in our number 1 spot, Issei Sagawa. Nicknamed the Kobe Cannibal, this monster is not for the faint of heart. Now, unlike others on the list, he's only known for 1 brutal attack, but what he did will leave you speechless. Sagawa was born in Japan and says he had known since childhood of his gruesome instincts, but for whatever reason would always back out of his desires at the last second. All of this changed, however, when he moved to Paris to pursue his PhD. It was there that he met Renee Hartvelt, one of his classmates who he decided was the right victim. Sagawa says he picked her due to her beauty and stature, as he saw himself as weak, ugly, and small, and believed that he could absorb her energy. He invited her over on the pretense of a dinner, but knew all along what he planned to do. He had it thought out. He took the woman's life, and I'm sure you can imagine what he did with her body, considering the monster's name. After 4 days, the body began to decompose, and he knew that he had to get her out of his apartment or risk being arrested for his crimes. However, he was caught attempting to dispose of her remains in a nearby lake by French authorities and was, of course, arrested immediately. After awaiting trial for 2 years, a judge ruled him legally insane and unfit for trial, ordering him to live out the rest of his life in a mental institution. He was deported out of France and sent back to Japan, where he was immediately committed. But here's where it gets crazy. Once in this institution, the psychologist deemed him fully sane, and that his perversions were the reason for his crimes, not insanity. But since his charges had been dropped while in France, all documents were sealed and nothing was sent to Japanese authorities, meaning that legally, the institution could not detain him any longer. After only 2 years away from society, Sagawa walked out freely and remains free to this day.
And we're obviously going to start at number 10 now with Alexis Flores. This guy is a fugitive from Honduras who was added to the FBI's most wanted list on June 2nd, 2007. He's wanted for the kidnapping, rape and murder of 5-year-old Iriana de Jesus. It happened in Philadelphia in 2000. Flores had been living as a homeless drifter under the fake name of Carlos. He was given work as a handyman in a local park. The park gave him shelter and clothing as well. On August 3rd of that year, 5 days after 5-year-old Iriana de Jesus had been reported missing, she was found dead in that very same basement that Flores had been given as his shelter. Police questioned the actual owner of the basement, who told them about Flores. When they went to go and find him though, he was missing. Ever since then, he's been on the run. Amazingly, police in Arizona actually arrested him in 2002 for possession of forged documents. They never made the link to the previous case though, and instead deported him to Honduras. In 2006, his DNA sample from Arizona was positively matched to the crime scene in Philadelphia. The following year, he was then added to the FBI's most wanted list. He is considered armed and dangerous and could be in Honduras or even back in the US.
The youngest guy currently on the FBI top 10 list, we have Alejandro Roselos Castello at number 9. He is an American criminal that is only 17 years old, and he killed a 23-year-old woman. That woman was someone Alejandro dated. This teenager is very dangerous.
The FBI is offering a reward of up to $100,000 for information leading directly to the arrest of alleged murderer Alejandro Castillo. The 18-year-old is the latest addition to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list.
The murder took place in Charlotte, North Carolina back in 2016, and ever since then, the police and the FBI are unable to track this kid down. Number 8, do you guys remember Kony 2012? Well, Joseph Kony is known as the leader
of the Lord's Resistance Army that is responsible for abducting as many as 2 million people. Is this real life right now? Coney also forced some of these children to kill their own parents. Well, the war against Coney started in 2012. $800 million was spent to try to track this man down, but over the years, there was no successful to kill or capture this man. There was a YouTube video talking in detail about who Coney was and the massive problem happening in our society because of this man. The video was titled Coney 2012 and it currently has over 100 million views.
If they knew, Coney would have been stopped long ago.
Let the world, let the international community take justice to him there. Follow him wherever he is. First, to rescue our children. And secondly, to deliver the justice.
We are determined to cooperate with any friend of Uganda to ensure that this mindless killing and slaughter is ended.
Alright, moving on to number 7 now, we have Jason Derek Brown. This fugitive from LA has been on the FBI's most wanted list since July 2007 for a first-degree murder and armed robbery that occurred 3 years prior. In 2004, Robert Keith Palomares, a 24-year-old armored truck guard, was carrying the weekend deposits outside a theater in Phoenix. At 10 a.m., Brown ambushed him with a gun, shooting him in the head 5 times. Brown then took a bag containing $56,000 in cash and fled down an alley on a bicycle. Palomares was transported to a hospital where he was pronounced dead. Within a week, police had issued an arrest warrant for Brown. He fled to Nevada, then California, then Oregon before disappearing completely off the grid. Police have 200 leads about where he might be, although they often conflict with each other. He could be in the US, Canada, or even France or Thailand. The FBI is now offering up to $200,000 for information leading to his capture. Next up on number 6 now, we have Yasser Abdel Said. This Egyptian man is a US resident wanted for the 2008 murder of his own teenage daughters, Amina and Sarah. He was an abusive and controlling father who stalked their every move, watching to see if they dishonored the family somehow. When he suspected that one of his daughters, Amina, was in a relationship, he moved the entire family to a new home. The 2 girls and their mother ended up fleeing from Yasser after Christmas 2007. Eventually though, their mother convinced them that they should return back home to him. On January 1st, 2008, he greeted them with a kiss and took them out in his taxi, telling them he wanted to have dinner with them. He then pulled over and shot both girls to death in the back of his taxi cab. Amina died instantly, while Sarah managed to call the police before she also succumbed to her injuries. Yasser vanished. The FBI thinks he may be driving a cab in New York. On December 4th, 2014, he was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitive list with a $100,000 reward for any information leading to his arrest. Moving on to number 5 now, we have Dawood Ibrahim. Meet the most wanted man in India. Ibrahim is the head of a 5,000 strong organized crime network called the D Company. Now they're responsible for everything from drug trafficking to contract killings in countries such as India, Pakistan and the United Arab Emirates. Ibrahim is personally wanted on charges of murder, extortion, targeted killing, drug trafficking and terrorism, to name but a few. In 2003, he was designated as a global terrorist with head money of $25 million US. According to Washington, it's thought he uses the same smuggling routes as Al-Qaeda and has worked with them on multiple occasions. He's thought to have been involved with them in the November 2008 Mumbai attacks, bombings which killed 257 people and wounded 713 more. It's thought that he's also linked to the Bollywood film industry. There have been multiple reports of him financing movies, but also threatening producers to get what he wants.
Alright, moving on to number 4 now, we have John Patrick Hannan, who is actually known as the world's most successful prison fugitive who has been on the run for the past 60 years. That's a 6-0. John Hannan was just 22 years old when he was arrested and put into jail. He was sentenced for 21 months behind bars for stealing a car and assaulting 2 police officers. But he was able to break out of the facility just 30 days after. This guy is either a super genius or just a big dum-dum. I say super genius because he was able to be in the run for the past 60 years. And I say he's a big dum-dum because who escapes from prison when you only have to serve a 21-month sentence? Good behavior might even have gotten him out earlier, who knows?
Next up, number 3 now, we have Semyon Mogolovich. This Ukrainian-born man is a Russian mafia boss, or rather, he is the boss of bosses. He is at the helm of most Russian mafia syndicates in the world. His vast empire has resulted in the FBI referring to him as the most dangerous mobster in the world. Mogolovich is involved in weapons trafficking, contract murders, extortion, drug trafficking, and prostitution on an international scale. He hasn't lived a very secretive life either, and his homes and private life are all there to see on his Wikipedia page. The problem for international law enforcement is how well connected and protected he is. In 2006, former Russian Secret Service member Alexander Litvinenko alleged that Mogolovich had a good relationship with a Russian president known as Vladimir Putin. Litvinenko was assassinated via radiation poisoning not long after that allegation. He used to be on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list, but was removed back in 2015. This is because the USA and Russia doesn't actually have an extradition treaty, meaning Russia is not obliged to hand him over to the US if they do catch him, basically making him untouchable. Next up at number 2 now, we have Shane O'Brien. He's a suspected killer who has been on the run for 2 years from UK police. He's now on Interpol's worldwide most wanted list. The 30-year-old is alleged to have murdered 21-year-old Josh Hansen in an unprovoked knife attack in a bar in West London in 2015. According to witnesses, O'Brien removed an item from his coat pocket and plunged it into Josh's neck. He was pronounced dead at the scene. A £50,000 reward is now being offered for any information leading to his prosecution. He's described as white, 6 feet tall, with grey eyes, dark brown hair, a full beard, and a tattoo on his back of an owl holding a skull.
And finally, at number 1, we have Robert William Fisher, who appears on the FBI most wanted list. If you find this man and catch him, you will be rewarded at least $100,000, which is why people actually make it their career finding these type of people who have bounties on their heads. Getting back to Robert William, he is wanted for the 2001 murder of his wife Mary and their 2 children. Robert Fisher then blew up his residential home in Scottsdale, Arizona. Investigators believe he murdered his family because he felt threatened by his wife's intent to divorce.
Justice for a Scottsdale mom and her 2 kids after they were horrifically killed. Now, 15 years later, the images of that crime continue to capture the nation's attention.
It's been about 17 years and still the FBI doesn't know his whereabouts. The question is, how smart is this guy to be able to live another life for all these years? Robert is also currently the longest lasting person currently on the FBI most wanted list. So think about that. The FBI most wanted list, they put a lot of resources into finding that person, but yet they just can't find this guy.